Good morning, it's Cody Leibold here, and welcome to this Facebook Live session where I'm going to be talking about a new article that I just released. It's on Medium right now, and you can find the link in the notes there. But we're looking at charity, Christian charity, and is it supposed to be forced? Is it supposed to be voluntary? And the article is called Matthew 5:40 through 42, and the charity question. Hopefully we'll be able to get some people on watching the show this morning. Good morning, Sergey. Good morning, Jackie. And as people are joining in, I'm just going to kind of fill you in on what the details are. We're looking at Matthew 5:40 through 42. And the idea is we're trying to figure out, what does the Bible tell us about Christian charity? And is it supposed to be voluntary or is it supposed to be forced? So let's go ahead and take a look at the verse. I'll read it to you, Matthew 5:40 through 42. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. And that's found in the English Standard Version. So the question that came up is, if we as Christians want to take this passage seriously, but at the same time we want to believe that socialism is a bad ideology, how can we have those two ideas at once? And here's the way one of my friends asked the question to me. She said, since you believe that the Bible contains zero evidence that Jesus would want to support this government-run, mandatory, inefficient, supposed charity, then, okay, you think that, but then what do you think when Jesus says if someone sues you and wants to take this from you? What do you think when he says if someone forces you to go 1 mile, you should go 2? And here's how I answered the question. I said that Jesus was teaching individual people. In fact, his followers, he was teaching that they should give when asked. And these instructions apply to Christians today. So we shouldn't discount Matthew 5 and say, oh, that's just Jesus talking to some other people. Jesus is teaching Christians how they should act. He's teaching that the kingdom of heaven is here, and this is how we realize the kingdom of heaven is by behaving in a different way, a way that is going to be the salt and the light in the world. And as Jesus was doing this, he was saying, this is a radical difference in the attitude that you have to have toward other people when you are being oppressed, when you're being challenged. And the thing that Jesus is teaching is difficult. Can you imagine somebody asks you to carry their backpack 1 mile and you decide that you're going to go 2 miles with them? That's something that would just ruin your day, right? Because then you're now 2 miles out of the way that you want to go. Obviously, this is a big deal. But we need to look and see what is the reason why Jesus would say such a thing. What is the context of this command? And Jesus was teaching people that they needed to be concerned with building God's kingdom. And so it's not that just because somebody asks something of you, that therefore you owe them something, and that's just the way Christian life is supposed to be, that whoever makes a demand on you, the answer is, yes, I will give it. In fact, what Jesus is teaching is this is a strategic priority for people that are in the kingdom of God, that they would be looking at how they can positively influence others. If someone slaps you on the cheek, it's a huge challenge to you, to your honor. And if you turn the other cheek, you are allowing them to double their shame, and you're putting them in the position of making the choice. Are they going to double their shame? You're basically saying, I'm better than this. I'm not going to spit on you. I'm going to turn my other cheek, and I'm going to see if you really meant that. And what you're doing is giving an opportunity for the person to change their heart. What you're doing, as Paul wrote in Romans 13, is, in Romans 12, I believe. Yeah, Romans 12:20. You're giving the person burning coals on their head. You're actually shaming them. And we'll get to that. So there is a purpose, there is a strategy behind this command. I'm going to see if, let's just want to check something real fast. So let's talk about what it was that Jesus was accomplishing. Was Jesus giving a command in Matthew 5 about how we can create a just society? We have in the Bible other commands about how a just society was to be formed. And Romans 13 is a really good example of that. It talks about how the government is supposed to bear the sword against wrongdoers, and the government is supposed to praise those who do good. And those are the only real purposes that the Bible gives us for the government. I mean, it's to lead the people in war against oppressors. The government is the agent of force. It's the agent that wields the sword, and because it wields the sword, that's a huge responsibility. And the government has the responsibility to use that only to punish wrongdoers, not to shape society. I think there should be a bridge over here. I wield the sword and I tell people they should go and they should build that bridge. The Bible doesn't talk about that. There's no reason why people in a free market couldn't do those kinds of things. But there is something that people in a free market cannot do, and that is they cannot use force just as they so choose. What would you call it? Vigilante justice. That would lead to a disaster long term for our society if that happened. So there's a reason why there has to be one agent that wields the sword and that controls that. And that controlling sword itself has to be controlled. It has to be controlled so that the sword is used only to punish wrongdoers, according to Romans 13. So knowing that that's in the Bible, but also that Matthew 5 is in the Bible, then what do we take this to mean? Jesus is giving instructions about how individual people should voluntarily choose to behave when somebody puts them out. And taking the whole Bible into account, I mean, for example, Jesus tells his disciples at one point that if they don't have a sword, they should go buy one. Do you think that Jesus' words are contradictory? That what he is saying is that you need to have a sword to defend yourself if you're traveling and somebody wants to steal from you, but that's somehow incompatible with, I have my sword in my hand and a Roman soldier walks up to me and says, walk with me 2 miles, or walk with me 1 mile. What would you do? Would you pull out your sword? No. And there's a difference in the scenario. What's the difference? The difference is that one of them is legally compelling you to do something and you don't really have an opportunity to fight back against that. But what you can do is you can make the best of that situation. Whereas if someone like a criminal were to accost you on the middle of the road and you pulled out your sword, you would be within your rights to defend yourself, even to use force against the other person. So I believe these principles are compatible. And so there's other principles that we have to bring to bear on what Jesus says in Matthew 5. And one of them is, Paul says that if a man will not provide for his own family, then he is worse than an unbeliever. Well, that's a clue about whether or not you should give all of your money away, right? Because if somebody in the world demands your money and suddenly you cannot feed your family, what are you going to do? That's a clue about how to understand the passage about turning the other cheek if you get slapped. Notice that Jesus said turn the other cheek if you're slapped, but he's not talking about turn the other cheek if someone is pointing a sword at you or at your children. There's a little bit of a difference. What's at stake? And Bud points out the Bible also says if a man doesn't work, he doesn't eat. And thanks for pointing that out, because the fact is there's a lot in the Bible about personal responsibility, as well as there's a lot in the Bible about the importance of giving it to other people. By the way, this is an Ask Me Anything call, and I've been on for a couple of minutes now, but if anyone has a question, go ahead and post it right there in the comments. And I'm going to be trying to monitor that. It's a little bit tricky for me to monitor it, but I'm going to keep on going with what I was talking about. About the turning the other cheek thing, do you think that the Bible contradicts itself? Do you think that in one place it says one thing, and in another place it says something completely incompatible? I ask that because in John, when Jesus is standing before the high priest, Jesus gets slapped on the cheek. And that's significant. If Jesus got slapped on the cheek, we want to know what he did in response. And he actually turned to the person who slapped him and says, "Why are you violating the law?" So the one time that Jesus could have followed his own instructions to turn his other cheek, he actually stood up and said that was wrong. And he did it because he was defending the law. And I think that in that case, basically you have to ask yourself, what are you trying to accomplish by the choice that you make? If you're by yourself with one other person, and that person gets irritated at you and they slap you across the cheek as a way of just insulting you, how can you restore that relationship? What's the best thing you can possibly do? Maybe to turn the other cheek. You should be willing to consider that. You should be willing to do it if you think it's going to lead to God's glory. Jesus standing in front of the high priest getting slapped, what is at stake? Well, there's no potential right now for him to restore his relationship with that person who slapped him. What there is a potential for is for him to stand up and say, you just violated the law, and why do you do so? And Jesus isn't the only one that did this when slapped in front of one of the priests. Actually, this happened in Acts as well to Paul. And Paul knew Jesus' teaching better than anyone, I would imagine. Paul did the exact same thing that Jesus did. Paul said, why are you doing this? Actually, he went a little overboard and said, you whitewashed tomb. And he insulted the man. And then somebody said, whoa, whoa, hey, that's the priest. And Paul said, I didn't realize. I wouldn't have said it because I wouldn't have spoke against the priest if I knew that. But nevertheless, there's nothing wrong with Paul challenging, just as he's following Jesus' example. And so as we're looking at Matthew 5, which is a classic verse, if you're one of the social justice Christian liberals, trying to show people that, it's all about the least of these. Well, you need to find that term, the least of these. But it's all about giving. It's all about reversing whatever you think makes most sense or what would follow logically. And actually, there's nothing in Matthew 5 to make you think Jesus is telling you to be illogical. What Matthew 5 is telling you is be logical about what your goals are. And if you can build God's kingdom by giving your cloak, walking an extra mile, turning the other cheek, build God's kingdom by doing that. But keep in mind, guys, that the Bible is not contradictory. And so what Jesus taught in Matthew 5, what he modeled in John, what Acts models with Paul, what Jesus said about bearing the sword, what Paul said about a man must provide for his own family. If a man will not work, he will not eat. All of this must be looked at in combination. We should ask, if this is all true, and if they knew that it was all true, then what could Matthew 5 possibly mean? So we're looking at these verses in particular, Matthew 5:40 through 42. If anyone would sue you, take your tunic. Let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. And we're trying to understand how, if the rest of the Bible is true, can this part be true? In fact, how, if we're not crazy, can this passage be true? And the main argument is that we need to take the whole Bible into account and ask, what is the purpose of this command? And once you understand the purpose, then you understand when it's to be applied and when it's not to be applied. And I would make the argument that these instructions in Matthew 5, they do not all apply in the same way across every circumstance. And I make that argument on the basis of the fact that Jesus didn't follow that in the exact same way depending on his circumstance, and neither did Paul. But what does apply in all cases is the principle of what is our goal. And that is that we should seek to restore our enemies. We should do whatever is best to bring people into God's kingdom. And I mean, listen to Paul in Romans 12:20 when he says that you should love your enemies, you should pray for those who persecute you. And he says that the purpose of that is so that you will heap burning coals on their head. And I think that what he's talking about is the kind of kindness that brings somebody to shame, and the kind of shame that brings somebody to repentance. So, I mean, the purpose is not to torture them. The purpose is to let them realize just how wrong they are, and that might hurt. But Paul's purpose is pretty clear here, right? It's to change them. And Paul is not praying for his enemies because he feels like he has some kind of debt to them. He's praying for his enemies because he loves the Lord, and he wants to glorify the Lord and bring as many people to the Lord as possible. So it's an ethic that Paul is teaching and that Jesus is teaching that I would not call altruism. It's an ethic that I would not call owing things to other people. In fact, Romans 13:8 says that you should owe nothing to others, but you should just owe love to them. And the bigger picture is that it's all for building God's kingdom. All right, we've got some comments, so let me take a second and see if I can catch up to all the comments that are written here. Okay, so here's something from Michael Ray. A friend of mine, her dad was a preacher, but he was not perfect, and my friend turned against Christianity. Her dad had depression, drinking problem, was self-medicating. How do I bring her back? I see the shame and the anger. Michael, thank you for the question. Okay, this is a situation that I don't know a lot about. So, I mean, first of all, you don't bring back somebody, but when somebody does come back, it'll be because the Holy Spirit drew them back. And this is in God's hands, right? It's something that we pray for, and that we pray on the basis of God's glory. We say, God, let your name be made famous throughout the earth, and let your name be made famous for this friend of mine. And that's the way that David prayed through the Psalms. If you'll read in the Psalms, he's always saying, God, for the sake of your glory, please do this. And I believe that your faith matters. I mean, I believe that in the story of the paraplegic with his 4 friends, Jesus said that their faith had made him well. So I believe that you should pray for this person to turn back to the Lord, and that you should pray it with a heart set on the Lord's strength. Because if the Lord is strong, the Lord is capable of changing a heart from stone to flesh, and you believe that. Pray believing that. That's the best advice I could give. Now, as far as how to approach them, a Christian has the responsibility of speaking the truth to people and speaking it in a way that they can hear it. And sometimes they can't hear it, and sometimes you can only give them a little bit before you basically have to close your mouth. But if they know who the Lord is, point out the things that they already know and listen to them. Because that's one of the things that people usually don't feel like they're sufficiently listened to, and they will not listen to you until after you listen to them. So those are some just basic things that you could do. If you have a connection, strengthen that connection. And if you have the capacity to speak truth, speak truth. But you have to realize that depending on who the person is that you know, and how they know you, and how much trust there is, that changes what you're able to say and how much you're able to say at a time. And sometimes it must be more about you can communicate that you love the Lord without directly saying, hey, you need to do this, you need to do that. But as the situation comes up, and as you actually have a real relationship with somebody, they're going to tell you what's happening. They're going to say, this happened and it was terrible. They're going to just be talking, and you're going to say, I believe that the Lord can help you with that. Or you're going to say, I believe that was unwise, and that if you follow the Lord, this kind of thing wouldn't happen. There'll be lots of opportunities that you can give glory to the Lord, that you can point them. And like Paul says, you can plant the seed, and maybe you're the planter, maybe you're the one that waters it. Let's see if there's other questions that come up, and feel free to follow up, Michael, if there's more on that topic. It's 7:18 right now, and I'm going to go until 7:30 today. And I just wanted to mention, if you're just joining, go ahead and look in the post that you saw. There should be a link over to my article that I wrote, which is on Matthew 5:40. We spent the first part of the call today talking about Matthew 5:40 through 42, and the question of Christian charity. And the way I framed it in the post was, should charity be voluntary? Should charity be mandatory? The reason I ask that is there are a lot of Christians today who see Jesus' teaching as being an example of what basically the state should do. We say that as Christians we should be taking care of the widows and the orphans. And then we say, well, if we have the opportunity as Christians to vote for our government to do it, shouldn't we also do that? And it's just this sort of like, I believe this, therefore I believe that type of reasoning. And the question is, do we have biblical justification for that? Is there anything in Matthew 5 that says that we should be voting for the government to take control of this issue? People like me who believe in free markets and are very passionate about capitalism often get accused, of not really caring about the fact that people need a safety net. And people will say, well, don't you believe in a safety net for someone who's down and out on their luck, somebody who just needs to be picked up? And here's my response is, yes, I believe in a safety net. Who said that the government should be the one to provide that safety net? I'm very pro safety net. I want to ask you a question. Do you trust the government? Do you trust the government to make the best decisions about how to manage our national parks, or about how to make laws about what kind of drugs you should and should not have access to? Do you trust the government to educate your children? Why do you trust the government to make the decision that it requires wisdom of how to help people who are in need? why not trust somebody who's close to that person? Why not set it up so that the local church is the one that's giving? And of course, people argue back and they say, well, the church isn't providing for people. And I say, are you kidding me? Nobody in this country is starving. No children in our country are starving if they're willing to walk to a church. And there are churches in every town. There are churches giving away billions upon billions of dollars, if you were to add it all up in our country. And we're giving more than anybody's ever given, voluntarily. The United States gives more to its own poor and to the poor around the world than any country ever has. And I want to ask you a question. If the government was taxing us a little less, do you think that we would be giving even more? I believe so. Jonathan Bennett says, I trust the government with nothing. The only authority I trust, absolutely, is God's. I'm enjoying your comments just about every day you're on there, Jonathan. And Michael Ray says, nope. Ben Mordecai says, I have a question about your perspective. If you were to meet a robber on the road and you were armed, you have the right to defend yourself with violence, right? What if they say, I'm robbing you because of your profession of Christ? Now, it is Christian persecution and not ordinary robbery. And if you are robbed and do not resist, it is suffering shame for the sake of Christ. And if you die a martyr. Something seems incongruous about, you know what, the post preview didn't give me the rest of it. So let me see if there's any more. It just says something seems incongruous about the two situations. All right, so Ben, I think I have an answer to that one. And the issue is this. When in 1 Peter and when in Paul's writings, it talks about Christians suffering persecution, who was persecuting them? There were two different ways that people were being persecuted back then. And one is that the townspeople in your town said, those Christians are weird. They believe something that I don't know about, and I don't trust them. They're not worshiping my Roman deities or the Caesar. And so I'm not going to do business with them. In fact, I'm going to turn my face away whenever I see them. And that's persecution, right? Okay, well, that's a persecution that somebody did against you, but they made a voluntary choice, and that voluntary choice hurts you, but it's not forced against you. The other kind of persecution that Christians originally faced was the Roman government saying you're not allowed to meet together. The Roman government saying, we believe that you guys are eating babies, which they actually said that, and or eating human flesh because of the communion. They actually thought that that's what they were doing. The Roman government said, you guys are atheists because you don't believe in all of the pantheon of gods, and so they call them atheists, which is really ironic. Now, the Roman government at different times actually brought the sword against Christians. And this is the force of the state being used to kill or imprison Christians. Now, when that happens, that is a different kind of scenario than the one that you described, which is a robber on the road. So we've got several different scenarios that we've discussed. We've got people voluntarily treating you badly. We've got the government using force. We've got the robber on the road. And then there's another one. There's a situation where, say, you're Cassie Bernal and you're in Columbine. And somebody comes in with a gun, points it at you and says, are you a Christian? If so, I'm going to kill you. And then what do you say? Now, I believe that she did the right thing by saying, I am a Christian and I'm willing to die for my faith. Because she was in a situation where she had no ability to fight back. If she had a gun, she shouldn't have said, I'm a Christian and I'm willing to die for my faith. She should have pulled the gun and killed the guy. That's how I answered those questions. If it's the government, you cannot win a war against the government, and thus you should submit to your government or escape. Escaping might be the better option. But you shouldn't fight back against a government that is a major world power. How are you going to win? So that's how I reason through those things. Now, as far as somebody comes up and robs me, like you said, is there some kind of opportunity for me to share the gospel with them? Yeah, there is, actually. You know what I'm going to do is and you should read Jacob Brunton's article on this. It's called How to Carry a Gun Like a Christian Egoist. And he says the first thing you should do is subdue the man. And once they're subdued, tie them up and then share the gospel with them. There's no reason why you cannot do both. They're completely compatible. You want to follow up on that one, Ben? Because there may have been more to your question, and maybe I just didn't understand the objection. But I think that answered as far as I understood. All right, we have about 5 more minutes on the show today. If you have any other questions, go ahead. Jonathan says, sure thing, man. Man, I am having so much fun on Facebook just reading people's thoughts and learning how other people think, learning what other people think is important. So that's great, seeing that. Let me give you guys a little report on what I've been working on lately. If you are interested, this is something you might want to know about, which is I'm creating my first course, and this is going to be an email course. So it's something that gets delivered to you over a period of about 5 days. And it's about how to be a Christian writer, and especially how to use blogging and Facebook, and just to get started if you've never done it before. So be on the lookout for that. It's going to be called Writers Write. Something, if you want to call yourself a writer, you got to get writing, and I can help you with that. More comments. Bud says, I believe Jesus knew that not only that Peter would deny him, but also that Peter would cut off the soldier's ear. The whole story serves God's purpose, and Jesus knew Peter had a sword and would abuse it. God uses flawed men. Outside of Christ, we are all flawed. Yeah, I agree, but great comment there. And I would say that Peter morally should not have struck the man, right? Because right after he did, Jesus told him that if you live by the sword, you'll die by the sword. Now, this is the same Jesus who said that you should have a sword. So what is he saying? Well, I think this corresponds with what I said earlier, which is that if the government is coming to arrest you, that is not the time to be using the sword. If you want to be a man of violence that resists the government, good luck with that, because most of the time that's not going to go very well for you. And then Ben says there are plenty of helpful stuff, like you mentioned. It just seems like there are a lot of intricacies to the question. Yes, Ben, I think that what would be really good if you're curious about that topic of pacifism is what the topic is. Read what John Piper says about carrying a gun, and then read Jacob's response, because Jacob actually responds to John Piper. And they're on opposite sides of the spectrum. Piper actually says that he would be very hesitant if somebody came into his house and started attacking his wife to use force to defend his own wife. Which, I read that and I think, Piper, have you not read Paul? Because he says if a man will not provide for his family, he's worse than a heathen. And, I mean, there's other things too. There's passages like, somebody who doesn't stand up against evil is weak. And so I think that Piper really needs to think through that. Jacob does a really great job of explaining why Piper is mistaken. And that's a rare thing that Piper is mistaken, actually. We really love what Piper has to say. Seth Dunn asks, on an ethic of divine command theory, is charity obligatory? So divine command theory, I need to look up a little bit to make sure I understand, because I'm not sure what all is involved in divine command theory. You could follow up in your question if you want to. I'm just going to read it on Wikipedia. Divine command theory, also known as theological voluntarism, is a meta-ethical theory which proposes that an action's status as morally good is equivalent to whether it is commanded by God. So this gets into some philosophical questions like the Euphrithro dilemma, which Plato asked and Christians have asked, which is it good because God said it's good, or did God say it's good because it's good? Now, I reject divine command theory. I'm just going to let you know that. So now, if you're going to ask on an ethic of divine command theory, is charity obligatory? Well, yes. But even without the theory of without that theory, it's obligatory for Christians, right? I mean, I'm not sure what the particular issue is with divine command theory for that question. I'm not sure what the connection is, because I mean, if you're a follower of Jesus, then following his commands is obligatory. But that doesn't mean that you should be forced to do it. There may be something to your question that I'm missing, so follow up if you want. And I'll stay on as long as there are people asking questions. Okay, Stephen Farless Jr. asks, curiosity is killing me. What Bible is that with the spine ridges? Top left, your left, third from the left. Well, so left and right are reversed, but are you talking about that one? That's the one, right? Okay, that is a really nice Bible that somebody gifted me. Um, Jeff Dennis gave it to me. Would you like to see it? Hang on. All right, so this is leather, and it's my family Bible, and it's got the medieval or Renaissance style of the way it's written. See the huge margins? Apparently in the Renaissance they thought that was the most beautiful way of presenting the material, and I agree. So that's a massive Bible. It's an ESV, and maybe I could tell you what it's called if there's a specific name for it. But he gave this to me as a gift because I helped him with an assignment. You know, I'm not seeing something that says like, oh, okay, it's the single column legacy edition. You notice how in most Bibles there's 2 columns? This one is a single column, so it reads more like a book, which wouldn't that be great? So anyway, yeah, I love that, and that's going to be our family devotional reading once my kids get old enough to handle this size of a Bible. Okay, Seth Dunn has some more follow-up questions. Since morality is grounded in God's nature, I think divine command theory skirts the Euthyphro dilemma. Yes, but maybe I don't understand what the definition is of divine command theory, because I'd have to know exactly what you take that to mean, and then I would have some qualifications. Yes, it's grounded in God's nature, but the question is, why is God's nature what it is and not something different? So maybe just one way that you could, kind of like a little brain teaser for you, is if God said 2 + 2 = 5, would that be true? And I'm going to say no. I'm going to say that there is a standard of what is possible for God as well as for us. I'm following up on Seth's comments here. It says, so following his commandments is divine command theory, I think. Well, okay, so there have been people that rejected divine command theory that called themselves Christians and that followed his commands. But I think that what Jesus said to Judas about the perfume being used is a good point in showing contrast. But that is a great example of, Judas says we shouldn't use this perfume on you, we should give it to the poor. And Jesus said, the poor you'll always have with you, right? So, yeah, if you're trying to understand Jesus' perspective on charity, you have to understand that this is a means to an end. It's not that we should deprive ourselves of any good things until there are no more poor on the earth, because that's not going to happen. Okay, Seth followed up with me about the 2 + 2 = 5, and he says God can't say that. Okay, good. And wait, God can't say 2 + 2 = 4. Okay, Seth, I'm not sure where you're going with that, because 2 + 2 does equal 4. And God can't say that? So I'm not sure what you mean. Maybe follow up with me on my profile, because we could talk about that more. All right, guys, it's a little past the half hour, so if you have any other questions, go ahead and ask them now. Otherwise, I'm jumping out. Wait, Seth says, oops. Did you mean to say 5? Okay, so here, let me update. God cannot say that 2 + 2 = 5. I'm glad that we agree on that. That's good. All right. Hey, everybody, if you've watched it this far, thank you so much. It's been really enjoyable. And don't forget to go and read my article and share it. You'll find the link in the notes. Thanks, and have a great Saturday.